Tonight, what did President Obama do to have so many enemies? Jonathan Alter tells us in his new book, The Center Holds. Plus, what potential jurors are being asked to reveal in the Whitey Bulger trial. And it's all style and designs at LaSalle's Fashion Archives, now on Greater Boston. Good evening. The re-election of President Barack Obama last year was a stunning outcome that few would have predicted after the devastating 2010 midterms. How the president fought back against the conservative onslaught, all while dealing with 2 wars and a dismal economy, is the subject of Jonathan Alter's newest book, The Center Holds: Obama and His Enemies. We'll speak to Jonathan in a moment, but first, here's some of what the president faced. This should have been an early warning. That was South Carolina Congressman Joe Wilson interrupting President Obama's televised speech on health care reform, and the voice of an opposition movement that would soon lead to a stunning upset.
Well, with all due respect, it's not the Kennedy seat, and it's not the Democrat seat, it's the people's seat.
Outrage over health care reform helped fuel a landslide that Scott Brown and his GOP colleagues rode to electoral success in 2010. It also launched the modern Tea Party movement.
I want to tell them, we'll keep clinging to our Constitution and our guns and religion, and you can keep the change.
That clash of worldviews led the Obama administration into repeated disputes with Republicans in Congress over government spending.
I cannot support any effort to raise the debt limit that isn't accompanied by immediate and permanent structural spending reform.
And a string of congressional hearings into so-called scandals ranging from Fast and Furious to Solyndra to Benghazi. But it was one issue the president found most annoying.
The dominant news story wasn't about these huge monumental choices that we're going to have to make as a nation. It was about my birth certificate.
But for all the scandal and outrage, President Obama handily won re-election to a second term. All right, and Jonathan Alter is here with his new book, The Center Holds: Obama and His Enemies. Welcome.
Thank you, Emily.
One of the dangers in writing recent history is so much happens after. It's like amazing, like all of this stuff that he's facing right now.
That's right. But the 2011-2012 period will be seen as a hinge of history, as one of the most critical periods in our recent history, because this is when the United States made a fundamental choice about the direction that it was going to take. If Mitt Romney had won, it wouldn't have been like when he was governor of Massachusetts with a liberal state legislature. He would have been riding a resurgent red state America, and he would have had to go along with what these people I consider to be radical Republicans believed, or he would have been a man without a party. And the proof of that, Emily, is that during the primaries, he never once defied the conservative base of the Republican Party. He never once called out somebody like Rush Limbaugh or otherwise, tried to indicate that he was not in tune with where they were. And if he wouldn't do that during the primaries, when he needed independent votes, why would he do it as president? So we would have had the Ryan plan, Vice President Paul Ryan, basically repealing the social contract that goes back to Franklin Roosevelt, shredding the social safety net, and a very different country. So as upset as some progressives are right now over what's been happening to the president in the last month, he's had a terrible month. He's made some mistakes. If the election had gone the other way, which it very easily could have, we would be living in a different country.
You spend a lot of time talking about the conservative media, the onslaught of criticism, which was, in your words, you say, in many ways, presidents are always under scrutiny, but he faced a tougher scrutiny and uglier, in a way, than any other president ever has. Why?
Well, first of all presidents do. Remember, they accused Bill Clinton of being a murderer, and they accused George W. Bush of knowing that 9/11 was going to happen in advance. But the volume of it with this president was greater. Some of it was racism. Some of it was a reflection of the hyper-partisanship. Some of it resulted from the fact that he had to do some pretty dramatic things when he first came to office to rescue the economy. And so a $787 billion stimulus is going to generate real reaction from people who want government, as Massachusetts native Grover Norquist puts it, to be so small you could strangle it in a bathtub. You know, those are the people, the Norquists, who are running that party. So when they saw things moving in the other direction in 2009 and 2010, even though Obamacare was really based on the Massachusetts plan and what Howard Baker and Bob Dole proposed 20 years ago, it was a moderate plan. It was not a radical socialist plan. In the context, it was easy to portray it that way. So you got a kind of a Obama derangement syndrome, as it's called.
Great. I had never heard that phrase. Is that your phrase? Or?
No, that actually it started with Bush derangement syndrome about 6 or 7 years ago, and then when Obama came in, certain people started calling it that. But I think I'm popularizing it.
Because it's kind of these crazies, these wingnuts.
The stuff that you see online and the birther stuff, which ended up backfiring. But the reason that the president decided to release his birth certificate, and I have the whole backstory.
Yeah, I didn't know that whole thing about that guy Corsi and all that.
Yeah, but also what I try to do is take these familiar events and on every page tell people something that has not been published.
I never knew. Yeah, I didn't know.
The context, the history, something that happened behind closed doors. And when he went to his house in Chicago and rummaged through his late mother's papers looking for the certificate, he told his aides, maybe I shouldn't do this. If I was being political, I would just let them keep going with this birther nonsense because it helps me. But he said once he started seeing it on Meet the Press, and once he started seeing it, as you had in your clip, actually interfering with the presidency and no longer on the fringe, but senators like saying, well, I'm not sure whether he was born in the United States. When that happened, he said, even though it's better for me politically to let this stuff keep going, I'm going to put an end to it. But, of course, he couldn't put an end to it because even when he got the state of Hawaii to produce his long-form birth certificate, the wingnuts and the crazies were still out there. And you had Romney at one point, he's in Michigan, and he's with Ann Romney, and they say, nobody here has to check my birth certificate. You all know I was born in Michigan. Like, what kind of a shot is that to take in a presidential campaign, to feed the crazies? So this was a wild year, and I wanted to capture some of that, but also take it to a new place and put it in a historical context that we haven't seen. Because I think the only way to understand today's events, to understand whether he can come back again, maybe break some of this gridlock, get immigration reform and some of these other things done, the only way to understand that, or even the NSA snooping scandal, is to see where we've come from. And that's the context I'm trying to provide.
You credit his Chicago team for really pulling him out a lot of these dark corners, but I mean, they're not there now, are they? I mean, the cave
surprisingly few people from the campaign went into or back into the government. You mentioned the cave, just to tell people what this is. I think in some ways the part of the book that's getting the most attention is I do a pretty deep dive on how they use digital technology to win the election. Everybody knows that they were better.
Right here.
They were better than Romney on this, which was surprising because he came out of he called himself a numbers guy, and he came out of an analytic profession. But it was Obama who ran the Bain campaign with the rigorous metrics, measuring everything. And you had this very colorful group of 20-somethings in the cave, which was a secret annex to the Chicago headquarters that nobody was allowed in until after the election. They had not just a data scientist, but biophysicist, a child prodigy, 3 professional poker players, and they figured out how to re-engineer American politics. And so I think it's a pretty unusual story that's going to have a big impact, not just on politics. This is the interesting thing that's happened since my book came out. The techniques that I explain in the book that they used out of Chicago to reinvent the campaign are now being picked up by business and nonprofits, and they want to figure out how do we increase our online fundraising tenfold. They took it from $15 million a month to $150 million a month last year at this time. How do we figure out how our sales force, in the Obama campaign's case, it would be the field organization, how do we figure out how to make them more efficient the way Obama's Chicago team did with this micro-targeting that was very, very effective? How do we use Facebook as well as they did? Facebook produced as many as 1 million extra votes for Obama through what they called a targeted sharing plan. So I tried to translate the techies from the original geek, and explain it in ways that are readable, and also to explain what they called the geek gap between Romney and Obama in that part of the book.
Right, so I got to ask you about one of the characters in the book.
Sure.
You weave in and out, and I know him too, Roger Ailes, because I used to work at Fox. So you've got him in a couple of different scenarios. One, saying in front of his staff that the president is lazy. There was another thing that you described where he was working in a closet one day because he thought his office was bugged. And then the one that has him most annoyed is you claim that he has some kind of bulletproof glass or something. So here's... Is that true? And then he's pushing back and saying, oh, Jonathan, so I should finish my thought, so that the gay people can't shoot me from the street or something like that. And he's saying you must be homophobic for saying that.
Okay. First of all, that one didn't say that he put in bulletproof glass. It said that he tried to put in bulletproof glass, and that is footnoted to a Rolling Stone article. So that one was a secondary source. But a story that I heard and that I have in the book, and that he is sort of denying, but not really, is that Rupert Murdoch came into a meeting at News Corp one day and said, Roger is batty, he's wacky, he's crazy. He came in last weekend and thought that the only place in the building that wasn't bugged was a supply closet. So I didn't say Roger Ailes worked out of a supply closet. I said that Rupert Murdoch said he worked out of a supply closet, which Ailes never denied. And interestingly, in this little feud that I'm having with him right now, he acknowledged that Rupert Murdoch thought he was paranoid, which I thought was a rather interesting basic acknowledgement of the thrust of that particular chapter in my book.
He's got a few quirks, just to leave it at that. So going back to the kind of the morass, the situation now, I mean, do you think he is going to turn it around much the way he did the election? Because many people, and you got great stuff in there too about, all those people from Fox, Karl Rove and Dick Morris claiming he was going to, Romney was going to win it, and believing it. And now here in the situation, he's got the presidency, but it seems to be sort of tumbling out of control. Well, things look bad now, and so the good news about my book, in selfish terms, is that it's out before Father's Day. It's a good Father's Day gift. The bad news for me is that he's in a real down phase, and so it's hard for people to remember. You can't count this guy out. He has a lot of tools at his disposal to come back, and so I think these scandals will fade, and the big issue right now for his legacy is what happens on immigration reform. If that's killed, that would seriously tarnish his legacy, but I think it's more likely to pass, and the reason, again, goes back to what I have in my book about the way he won the Latino vote. He got 71% by employing somebody like the Latina Oprah. Most people have never heard of her, but they communicated on a whole different level that I explain, and because they won so overwhelmingly with Latinos, the Republican Party understands, at least anybody with any sense in that party, that they must do something about that, and that's why we're probably going to get immigration reform. Not going to count him out. All right, Jonathan Alter, pleasure to have you here. Thanks a lot, Emily.